The rain hammered the corrugated metal roof of Malton Livestock Market, each drop pounding out a dull, relentless rhythm. It was the kind of cold, gray Yorkshire afternoon in October that seeped into your bones, making even the most seasoned farmers pull their collars high and their hats low. The auction barn buzzed with voices, a mix of clipped local chatter and the occasional sharp laugh that cut through the air, echoing off the damp concrete and metal pens. Will Thornfield stood near the back of the crowd, boots rooted in sawdust and muddy straw, broad shoulders hunched beneath a heavy waxed coat. His beard was salt and pepper, his hands rough and calloused, marked by years of hard labor. Blue eyes, sharp and steady, watched the proceedings with an air of stoic patience, the kind born from generations of working the land. In his chest, though, there was a restlessness, a pressure he couldn't quite name. The auction was almost over, and he was just about to head home, back to Thornfield Farm, when he noticed the last lot being led into the ring. The crowd's noise faltered, replaced by a kind of awkward silence, as if everyone was watching something they wished they weren't. In the center of the ring stood a horse so thin its ribs showed like piano keys. Its coat, once a deep chestnut, was muddied and matted, rainwater streaming down its sides. The animal's head drooped, tangled mane falling into hollow, haunted eyes. Will's gaze fixed on those eyes that seemed far too intelligent, too knowing for a beast in such a state. "Last lot of the day, folks. What'll you give for this fine specimen?" the auctioneer called out, his voice trying to inject some cheerfulness into the gloomy atmosphere. A few snickers rippled through the crowd, but most turned away, shifting their boots uncomfortably, ready to head for the warmth of their trucks or the nearby pub. No one wanted a horse like that. It was a burden, a reminder of failure. A couple of the younger farmers elbowed each other, whispering, one of them smirking as he nodded toward Will. He felt their eyes on him, but his attention was locked on the animal. The memory of his father surfaced, unbidden, the old man's voice, gentle but firm, as he'd nursed a half-dead lamb back to life in their kitchen. "You can always tell when an animal still has fight in it, Will. Don't let the world make you hard to their pain." Something flickered in the horse's eyes then, a stubborn spark. Will exhaled slowly, feeling the pull of that memory, and also something else. A sharp, inexplicable curiosity. There was something different about this animal, something the others didn't see. "Come on now, don't all jump at once," the auctioneer pressed, though his own tone had dropped. "Can't let this one go for nothing." A mocking laugh cut through the quiet, and Will glanced sideways to see a stocky man with a thick mustache grinning, his arms folded. "You'd have to pay me to take that old bag of bones home?" A few others chuckled. Will felt the weight of their dismissal, but also a surge of defiance. He remembered again his father's hand on his shoulder. He raised his own hand. £50, Will said, voice low but carrying through the quiet. Heads turned, a few people snorted. Someone muttered, "Must be cracked." The auctioneer, surprised but relieved, quickly hammered the gavel. "Sold. To Mr. Thornfield, thank you kindly." Will ignored the looks, the whispers that followed him as he made his way to the office to settle the payment. He felt the oddest sense of certainty. Not pride, exactly, but a stubborn resolve. He'd made worse decisions in his life. Besides, something in that horse's eyes haunted him, tugged at something deep inside. Outside, the rain had eased to a fine drizzle, but the cold was no less biting. Will found the stable boy, a sullen teen wrapped in a too-big raincoat, who handed him the battered lead rope without a word. Up close, the horse seemed even more pitiful, every bone sharp under its dull coat, legs caked in filth, mane clotted with burrs. Will placed a hand gently on its shoulder, feeling the shiver run through the animal's frame. "It's all right," he murmured, more to himself than the horse. "You're safe now." He led the horse to his old battered trailer, the animal walking with a slow, deliberate dignity that didn't fit its condition. As Will helped guide it inside, he felt a prickle along the back of his neck, as if someone were watching from the gloom. He glanced back, only shadows, puddles, and the last of the auction crowd vanishing into the gray. Driving home, windshield wipers thumping in time with his thoughts, Will couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He glanced into the rearview mirror. The horse stood quietly, its head low, but its eyes, those strange, searching eyes, followed his every move. What have I gotten myself into? Back at Thornfield Farm, the rain had finally stopped, leaving everything drenched and shining in the weak, late sun. Will unloaded the horse, guiding it into the old stone stable that had housed his family's animals for 3 generations. The smell of hay and earth, the warmth of the lantern glow brought a measure of comfort. As he settled the horse into a fresh stall, he caught another glimpse of those eyes, full of secrets and silent questions. He crouched beside the animal, reaching out a hand. "We'll get you sorted, won't we?" he said quietly. The horse watched him, unblinking. Suddenly, the weight of what he'd done settled in. The market, the laughter, the dismissive voices, they echoed in his mind. But as the wind rattled the stable door and the first notes of a new storm began tapping on the tin roof, Will Thornfield felt the strange certainty that the story, his story, and the horse's, was only just beginning. And in the flicker of the lantern light, as Will turned to leave, he caught one last look in the animal's eyes, a flicker, like a secret flame. Something in those eyes said, "This is not the end, but the start of something neither of them could imagine." The rain finally stopped, but a chill still hung in the air around Thornfield Farm. The old stone stable glowed under the flicker of oil lanterns, casting warm golden light on the rough flagstone floor and the stalls that lined the wall. The place held a quiet history, layers of stories built up in the scent of hay, sweat, and the distant memory of wild spring mornings. For Will Thornfield, this stable was a sanctuary. Tonight, though, with the strange horse shifting restlessly in the fresh straw, that familiar comfort felt oddly fragile. He hung his coat on a rusted nail by the door, shaking droplets from his hat. The horse stood in the farthest stall, its gaunt sides still heaving from the journey. Will set a bucket of water within reach and scattered flakes of sweet-smelling hay. The horse barely acknowledged either. Its attention, sharp and wary, stayed fixed on Will, as though weighing him, measuring the safety of this new place. "All right, let's see what secrets you're hiding." Will knelt beside the stall, bucket of warm water and a stiff brush in hand. He started gently, talking low and steady, letting the horse hear the sound of his voice. He worked the brush through the clumped mud, untangling patches of the matted mane. Gradually, the animal relaxed enough to let him work in silence. The water in the bucket turned brown with grime. He rinsed and repeated, moving methodically, uncovering more of the animal beneath the filth. His hands paused when he reached the horse's left shoulder. There, mostly hidden under a crust of dirt and an old patch of dried blood, was a strange, raised mark. A brand, old but unmistakable. Will squinted, cleaning it further, his heart suddenly racing as the shape became clear. The outline was a crest, 3 staggered ash leaves crossed by a thin, diagonal line, a mark he'd only ever seen once or twice in his life. The Ashworth Estate. Will's breath caught. The Ashworths were Yorkshire nobility, a family with a lineage stretching back over 2 centuries, synonymous with the highest echelons of British horse racing. Their stables, he remembered, were legendary. Their horses, world-class. As a young boy, Will had listened in awe to tales of Ashworth stallions winning races across Europe. But the family's reputation was complicated. Rumors swirling about their ruthless business dealings and the cutthroat way they protected their interests. He ran a finger along the edge of the brand. The horse shuddered, its ear flicking back. Will murmured reassurances, but the animal's whole body tensed, eyes rolling white for a moment, as if the touch brought back memories, ones it wanted desperately to forget. "Who are you, really?" Will sat back on his heels, suddenly uneasy. A sense of being watched crawled up his spine, making him glance over his shoulder toward the barn's dark corners. The shadows pressed in around him, silent and heavy. It was just the wind, probably, the way it whistled under the door, rattling loose boards and playing tricks with his mind. Still, the sensation lingered, raising the fine hairs on his neck. He forced himself to focus. The Ashworth brand, Here, on a half-dead horse abandoned at a country auction, it didn't make sense. Will's mind worked through the puzzle, heart thumping. The Ashworths didn't just let their horses disappear, and they certainly didn't dump them at livestock markets to be mocked and discarded. If this horse was from their stable, something had gone badly, dangerously wrong. He thought back, piecing together half-remembered gossip from the market, news clippings, stories traded over pints at the local pub. The Ashworths had weathered scandals before: doping allegations, disputes over inheritance, the sudden closure of one of their satellite farms after a mysterious fire. But nothing as public as this. Will stared at the horse, at its haunted eyes, and felt the familiar twinge of curiosity harden into genuine worry. He finished cleaning the brand as gently as he could. All the while, the horse stayed oddly alert, its breath quickening, nostrils flaring. Will leaned back, studying the animal's reaction. It was almost as if the horse understood what that brand meant, not just to the world, but to itself. There was intelligence there, a quiet fear, and a spark of recognition. You've seen things, Will thought. Things no one was supposed to see. He moved through the rest of his nightly routine on autopilot, checking on the sheep, locking up the feed room, double-checking the latches on every gate. Still, the sense of being watched refused to leave him. He caught himself glancing at the lane that ran down from the main road, half expecting to see headlights slicing through the darkness. But there was nothing, only the wind and the distant bark of a fox. He returned to the stable, unable to rest. The horse watched him, unmoving, as if waiting for his next move. Will lit another lantern, setting it by the stall, bathing the animal in a soft, comforting glow. He pulled an old stool close, settling down for a long vigil. He tried to recall everything he knew about the Ashworths and their horses. But his thoughts kept circling back to the brand, to the strange, wounded dignity of this animal. His own father's words came back to him, echoing in the quiet. A good man knows when to follow his gut, Will. When something doesn't add up, that's when you dig deeper. Hours passed. The stable grew quieter, the lantern burning low. The horse finally began to eat, tentative at first, then hungrily. Will smiled, relief warming his chest. Maybe, just maybe, this could be a new beginning for both of them. But as he turned away to fetch another armful of hay, he caught, just for an instant, the glint of something outside, a reflection in the glass of the stable window. He froze, every instinct screaming. The lane was empty, but the uneasy feeling gnawed at him. He shut the stable door tight, checking the lock twice. He couldn't shake the sense that, somewhere out there in the dark, someone else knew about the horse, someone who might not want the truth to come out. Inside, the stable returned to silence. The horse stood in the soft straw, eyes wide open, ears pricked forward, as if listening for dangers only it could sense. Will watched it, the two of them alone in the amber light, each carrying secrets the other could only guess. He didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning, the first ripple of something that would shake not only Thornfield Farm, but all of Yorkshire's hidden world of racing and rivalry. And in that hush, as the lantern guttered and shadows stretched across the walls, Will Thornfield felt the gravity of the unknown pulling him in, one careful step at a time. The night at Thornfield Farm was long and restless. Even after Will had locked up every door and checked every gate, sleep would not come easy. Images of the branded horse and those haunted, knowing eyes kept rising in his mind. He tossed in his old iron-framed bed, the house silent except for the distant hoot of an owl and the soft, steady patter of the rain's return against the slate roof. Eventually, as the clock ticked past midnight, Will gave up on sleep altogether. He pulled on a thick sweater, the wool scratchy against his skin, and crept downstairs. The farmhouse was cold, the kitchen tiles icy under his bare feet. Will filled the kettle and set it on the old Aga stove, waiting for the whistle while his thoughts churned. He needed answers, and he knew where to start looking. In the back of the house, past the faded wallpaper in a battered sideboard stacked with unpaid bills, was a small room that had once been his father's study. Now, it served as a cluttered storage space, stacks of old ledgers, boxes of farm records, and piles of dog-eared racing programs from decades past. Dust danced in the beam of his flashlight as Will nudged the door open. He sneezed, then set the flashlight down and clicked on the overhead light, which flickered before humming to life. The air was thick with the smell of old paper, leather, and the faint tang of mildew. Shelves sagged under the weight of binders and faded envelopes. In the corner stood a battered wooden trunk, its brass fittings tarnished by years of neglect. Will crossed the room, his breath coming faster, a mixture of anticipation and unease tightening in his chest. He knelt by the trunk, pulling it open with a creak that seemed far too loud in the quiet house. Inside, among yellowed letters and racing silks folded with care, were 2 old scrapbooks, his father's pride and joy, chronicling every notable horse and race that had passed through Yorkshire in the last 30 years. He settled on the floor, flipping through pages. The paper crackled under his fingers. Clippings of horses with names like Lightning's Echo, Ashworth Glory, and Sovereign's Pride, each accompanied by photographs, some faded to sepia, some crisp and sharp. Will's hands moved faster now, memories returning with each name and headline. He paused on a page with a large, dramatic photograph. There, captured mid-stride on the lush green turf of Ascot, was a horse so powerful and graceful it seemed almost unreal. Muscles rippled beneath a glossy chestnut coat, the animal's mane flying, nostrils flared and eyes ablaze with fierce intelligence. Sovereign's Pride wins Royal Ascot in record time. The headline screamed across the page, the article beneath describing a stunning victory. Will scanned the text, heart thumping as he read. Sovereign's Pride, owned by Ashworth Estate, storms to victory at Royal Ascot 2019. Odds-defying finish, new course record, valuation, £3.2 million. Unmatched potential. He recognized the eyes. Even in the photo, wild, alert, almost human. They were the same eyes he'd seen last night in his stable. He read on, following the story of Sovereign's Pride. The horse had been a sensation, a prodigy, breaking records and earning a reputation as a once-in-a-generation champion. But then, just as quickly as it had risen to fame, it had vanished. The last article in the scrapbook was dated May 2020, days before the Epsom Derby. Sovereign's Pride withdrawn, owner cites injury. Mystery surrounds Ashworth Stable. A chill ran through Will. He remembered the rumors. Whispers in the pub, muttered phone calls between trainers. Some said the horse had been sold quietly. Others claimed it had died in a training accident. But no body was ever found. No official explanation ever given. And now here, in his own barn, a battered, emaciated animal with that very brand. Will felt a strange combination of awe and dread. If this really was Sovereign's Pride, he had just brought a living legend and a whole storm of trouble into his home. He stared at the photograph again, then glanced at the horse's page in the ledger. Height, 16.3 hands, distinctive scar under right eye, 3 white socks, temperament, fiery but intelligent. Will's mind raced. The horse in his stable had a faded scar just below the right eye, a ghostly white mark against dark skin. He shut the book, fighting to slow his breathing. What was a £3 million horse doing, abandoned and half dead at Malton Market? Will dug deeper, searching through old correspondence. There were receipts, breeding charts, vet records, even a letter, neatly folded on Ashworth Estate stationery, written in a looping, formal hand. It mentioned security concerns, rumors of sabotage, and instructions for special care, as if they'd known, even then, that Sovereign's Pride might be in danger. Suddenly, Will was overwhelmed by the weight of what he was holding. Not just records, but evidence, secrets that people might have killed to keep. His hands shook as he packed everything back into the trunk. He glanced at the window, half expecting headlights to appear at the end of the drive. The sense of being watched returned, stronger now, like a cold wind at his back. He sat down hard on the floor, pressing his hands to his eyes. He felt both proud and terrified. Proud to have saved the great horse, to be part of a story that stretched back generations. But also, unmistakably, afraid. Because if the Ashworths had hidden the truth about Sovereign's pride, they would not hesitate to go after anyone who threatened their secrets. Will tried to think rationally. Maybe he was jumping to conclusions. Maybe this was just a remarkable look-alike, a horse with a similar build, the same haunted eyes. But deep down, he knew better. The evidence was too precise, the coincidences too many. He got up, cradling the scrapbook, and went out into the cold early morning. The air was sharp and clear now, the first light just brushing the edge of the Yorkshire hills. Will crossed the yard to the stable, boots crunching on wet gravel. Inside of the horse stood awake, watching him. Will entered the stall, holding up the photo for the animal to see, almost as if seeking confirmation. The horse took a hesitant step forward, nostrils flaring. It was a crazy thought. But in that moment, Will felt a flash of understanding pass between them, something that went beyond words. He knelt down, voice low and steady. "Who did this to you? What did you see?" The horse blinked, ears flicking. Will ran a hand down its neck, feeling the tension, the shiver of memory and pain. A sharp knock at the front door of the house shattered the silence. Will's heart leapt into his throat. He left the stable, locking it behind him, and hurried back to the farmhouse. He peered through the window. The lane was empty, but the sense of danger was real now. Urgent. He took one last look at the old photo, then slipped it into his pocket. Whatever secrets Sovereign's pride carried, they were now his burden too. And somewhere, out in the dawn, Will knew that the world was waking up, and nothing would ever be the same again. The knock at the door echoed through the empty farmhouse, sharp and sudden, shattering the dawn quiet like a stone thrown through glass. Will froze, every muscle tensed. For a moment he stood completely still, listening to the hush of the waking farm, the gentle snuffling of sheep in the far pasture, the distant, lonely call of a crow. Another knock, this one faster and more urgent. Whoever was out there wanted to be let in. He set the photograph of Sovereign's pride on the kitchen table, pressing it flat with a calloused palm. His mind whirred. Was it the Ashworths already? Someone from the auction, come to reclaim the horse, or just a neighbor needing help at some ungodly hour? Will crossed the hallway, boots heavy on the worn flagstones, and peered through the peephole. A figure stood in the glow of the porch light, hunched against the morning chill, a battered duffel bag slung over one shoulder. The man was older, grayer than Will remembered, but there was no mistaking the familiar stoop of the shoulders, the stubborn tilt of the jaw. Thomas Blackwood. Tom, his old friend, once the best horse trainer in Yorkshire, and a ghost from a life Will thought he'd left behind. Will pulled the door open. Tom stepped inside quickly, glancing over his shoulder before dropping his bag on the floor. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hair wild, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Will," Tom's voice came out in a harsh whisper. "We don't have much time. You need to listen to me." Will locked the door behind them, his own anxiety rising. "Tom, what's going on? You look like hell." Tom ran a shaking hand through his hair. He glanced at the table, where the photo of Sovereign's pride lay in the weak morning light. His gaze hardened. "It's him, isn't it?" Tom's voice was soft, trembling. "You found him." Will nodded. "Or maybe he found me." "Tom, what happened? Why is he here? Why does he look like—" Tom cut him off, his voice trembling. "Will, you don't understand. You were never meant to see that horse again. No one was. I shouldn't even be here, but—" He trailed off, glancing around as if expecting shadows to leap from the walls. Will poured 2 mugs of coffee, the hot liquid trembling in his hand. Tom wrapped his hands around his mug, drawing warmth from it. But he didn't drink. Instead, he leaned in, speaking fast, voice pitched low. After Ascot, after the big win, everything changed. Lord Ashworth, he wasn't satisfied. He wanted more. There were rumors about the Derby, about fixing the race, about things that shouldn't be done. I heard things, Will. I saw things. I tried to walk away, but I knew too much. And they made sure I'd keep my mouth shut. Will's knuckles whitened on his mug. You think they did something to Sovereign's pride? Tom's eyes were haunted. I know they did. They didn't just make him disappear. They erased him like he never existed. They said it was an accident, that he'd been put down because of an injury, but I never believed it. And now he's here, in your barn. That means someone knows. Someone's going to want him back, Will. And they'll do anything to make sure the truth stays buried. A silence settled over the kitchen. The only sound was the tick of the old clock and Tom's uneven breathing. Why are you here, Tom? Will finally asked. After all these years? Tom's voice cracked, guilt etched into every word. Because I love that horse, Will, more than any animal I ever worked with. He was like a son to me. I watched Ashworth break him down, use him, then throw him away like garbage. I tried to fight back, but I was just a trainer. I didn't have the power or the name. They threatened me, made it clear what would happen if I talked. So I left. I ran. But I never stopped looking over my shoulder. He pulled a crumpled envelope from his pocket and slid it across the table. Last week, I got this. No return address, just my name. Inside was a single photo, Sovereign's Pride, at Malton Market. I knew you went there sometimes, so I drove all night, hoping I'd get here before anyone else did. Will opened the envelope, hands trembling. The photo inside showed his stable, the horse staring out through the slats of the gate, its eyes wild with fear. They're watching us, Will. The Ashworths. They're people. They never let go of anything, especially not secrets. Will's mind reeled. The events of the last day fell into place with chilling clarity. The sense of being watched, the glint in the window, the silence on the lane. He glanced out through the kitchen window, half expecting to see headlights cresting the rise. The fields beyond were still, shrouded in gray morning mist. Tom, what do we do? Will's voice was low, grave. Tom straightened, jaw set, with the old, stubborn determination Will remembered. First, you need to lay low. Don't tell anyone about the horse. Not the vet, not the neighbors. Next, you need to protect him. Whatever happens, don't let anyone from Ashworth Estate near your land. If they come, you send me word. I'll handle it. He paused, then looked Will straight in the eye. There's one more thing. I have something you need to see. Not here. Too risky. I'll drive you to a safe place. Somewhere no one's watching. There's more to this than just a missing horse. Much more. Will felt the weight of Tom's words settle on his shoulders, cold and heavy. He thought of his father's old saying, a secret kept too long becomes a poison. Maybe it was time for the truth to finally come out, no matter the cost. He nodded. All right, Tom, whatever it takes. As the first light of morning filtered in through the window, the two old friends sat side by side at the kitchen table, their mugs cooling between them, the silence thick with the ghosts of the past. Outside, the world was waking up, sheep bleating, a rooster crowing, the wind whispering through the trees. But inside, everything was changed. The stakes were higher now, the danger more real than ever. Tom stood, hefting his duffel. We'll leave tonight. I've got a safe house up north. Old friend owes me a favor. In the meantime, keep your head down. And whatever you do, Will, don't let your guard down. Not for a second. Will watched him go, feeling the full weight of the storm gathering on the horizon. For the first time, he truly understood what he was up against. He went to the stable, stroking the nose of the battered horse, whispering quiet words of comfort. Don't worry, boy. I won't let them take you again. In that moment, Will made a silent vow. Whatever the cost, whatever the risk, he would protect Sovereign's pride. Because some things, loyalty, love, and the truth, were worth fighting for, even against the most powerful enemies. As Tom's car disappeared down the drive, Will Thornfield stood alone in the gray light, knowing that everything had changed, and that the real battle was only just beginning. The wind rattled the ancient windows of the King's Head pub, sending flickers of shadow racing across the low-beamed ceiling and the scarred wooden tables below. At this hour, the regulars gathered close to the fire, their voices kept low, eyes glancing up at each new arrival with the suspicion bred from generations of Yorkshire small-town life. Yet even among such wary company, tonight's atmosphere felt different, charged with an invisible tension, as if the very air had become a wire stretched too tight, ready to snap. Will Thornfield sat near the back, nursing a pint, his body stiff in the high-backed chair. He'd hardly slept in 2 nights, not since Tom had shown up at his door and blown the lid off everything he thought he knew about Sovereign's pride in the Ashworths. Will kept his eyes on the dark window, heart beating a wary rhythm. The old pub, usually his refuge, felt dangerous tonight, as if the walls themselves were listening. Tom arrived first, slinking through the side door and keeping to the shadows, his coat pulled up, hat low. He slid into the seat across from Will, breath steaming from the cold. "You sure about this?" Tom's voice was rough, almost a growl. Will glanced at the clock over the bar. "No, but it's the only way. If Ashworth's looking for Sovereign's pride, he's going to come to me. Might as well get it over with." "I'm tired of waiting for the axe to fall." Tom nodded, but his fingers drummed a nervous rhythm on the table. The pub's door creaked open again, and a hush fell over the room. Heads turned as a tall, impeccably dressed man stepped inside, the lamplight catching silver in his thick hair and the cut-glass sharpness of his cheekbones. Lord Edmund Ashworth didn't look like a man out of place among the beer mats and muddy boots, yet he commanded attention with a subtle, chilling authority. Even the barman's hand paused on the tap. Ashworth's eyes were like blue ice. He took in the scene with a thin smile and made his way to Will's table, his footsteps measured, echoing in the silence. He stopped beside their table. "Gentlemen, mind if I join you?" Tom tensed, ready to protest, but Will nodded once, keeping his own face neutral. "It's a free country." Ashworth sat down, removed his gloves finger by finger, and set them on the table with careful precision. He looked between the 2 men, lips curled in an imitation of politeness. "Mr. Thornfield, you have something that belongs to me," Ashworth began, his tone polite but the threat lurking beneath unmistakable. "I do hope we can resolve this matter amicably." Will met his gaze, feeling the weight of all the eyes in the room pressing in on them. "I bought a horse at Malton Market. Paid fair and square, that makes it mine." Ashworth's smile widened a fraction. "Not all debts can be paid in cash. Some things, Mr. Thornfield, come with responsibilities you might not understand." Tom bristled, but Will put a steadying hand on his arm. Ashworth continued, voice soft, deadly. "You see, some secrets are best left buried. Sovereign's pride is a relic, a mistake. I'm sure you're an honorable man, so you'll appreciate the wisdom of letting the past rest in peace." Will clenched his fists beneath the table. "If that horse is a mistake, it's not his fault. He deserves better than what he got from your lot. If you want him, you'll have to take it up with the law." The whole pub seemed to lean in, the silence growing heavy. Ashworth's eyes narrowed, a flicker of annoyance passing over his features. He slipped a business card from his inside pocket and placed it on the table, pressing it down with a single finger. Written in immaculate script was a single line. "You have 24 hours." Ashworth leaned closer, voice dropping so only Will and Tom could hear. "Consider this a courtesy. If the horse is not returned, there will be consequences, not just for you. Think carefully about who you trust and who might get caught in the crossfire." With that, he stood, his smile returning. "Good night, gentlemen. I do hope you make the right decision." He walked away, and as he did, every conversation in the pub died. All eyes tracked his movements. the quiet terror in the air thick and unmistakable. When the door swung shut behind him, the tension remained, coiled tight and hot in the room. Will stared at the card. Tom's face was pale, jaw clenched. "You see that?" Tom whispered, voice shaking with fear and rage. "He threatened you in front of the whole town. He thinks he's untouchable." Will pocketed the card, rising slowly. "Not anymore. If Ashworth thinks I'll be bullied into giving up Sovereign's pride, he's got another thing coming." Tom shook his head. "You don't understand what he's capable of. This isn't just about a horse, Will. It never was. Ashworth will stop at nothing to keep the truth buried. You saw what happened to Ray. How many others have been silenced?" Will's thoughts churned. He remembered the night his father told him that real courage wasn't just about fighting for yourself, but for those who couldn't fight for themselves. He thought of Sovereign's pride, the life in those battered eyes, the way the horse had shied from the Ashworth brand as if it still burned. And he thought of Tom, risking everything to bring the truth to light. A strange calm settled over Will. The fear was still there, but now it was laced with something else, anger, and a cold, steady determination. "I'm not backing down," Will said, voice hard as iron. "If Ashworth wants a fight, he's got one. But we do this my way. No more secrets. No more hiding." He glanced around the pub, at neighbors and strangers, at faces turned quickly away, unwilling to meet his eyes. "Tom, gather what you have. Meet me at the farm tonight. We start digging. If Ashworth wants to keep his secrets, he'll have to go through us first." They left the pub together, the cold night air biting at their cheeks. As they walked, Will felt the weight of Ashworth's warning like a stone in his pocket, but he did not falter. Behind him, he heard the low murmur of voices rising again in the King's Head, the first sparks of gossip and fear spreading through the village. But for Will Thornfield, there was no turning back. He would fight, not just for the horse, not just for Tom, but for every truth that had been locked away by men like Ashworth. The darkness outside pressed close, but Will's resolve was brighter than any lantern. As he strode back toward Thornfield Farm, the wind howled through the empty lanes, carrying with it the promise of reckoning. Tonight, the balance of power in Yorkshire was about to shift, and Will was determined to make sure it would never be the same again. The night after the confrontation at the King's Head pub was colder than any Will could remember. The old farmhouse felt like a fortress under siege, each creak of the timbers and rattle of the wind making his nerves jangle. He lay awake for hours, replaying Ashworth's threat in his mind, the memory of those icy eyes and that chilling, polite menace. The clock ticked toward midnight, when headlights finally swept across the yard, pausing outside the kitchen window. Will hurried to the back door, his heart pounding, relief washing over him when he recognized Tom's car. But Tom wasn't alone. Stepping out of the passenger seat was a woman, tall, athletic, with sharp eyes and dark hair pulled back in a loose braid. She moved with a confidence that suggested she was used to trouble. Tom made the introductions quietly, urgency in every motion. "Will, this is Dr. Eleanor Hartwell. Ellie, she's Ray Hartwell's daughter." Tom glanced at Will, as if those words alone should explain everything. Will nodded. He remembered Ray, steady, soft-spoken, and trustworthy, former head manager at Ashworth Estate, until he died suddenly in an accident a couple of years ago, or so the official story went. Now, as Ellie shook Will's hand, her grip was strong, her gaze searching. "We don't have much time," Ellie said, pulling a flash drive from her pocket. This is what got my father killed, and what almost got Sovereign's pride erased from the face of the earth." They gathered around the kitchen table, the light above throwing stark shadows across tired faces. Ellie slotted the USB into Will's battered laptop. It took a minute to boot, the old machine grumbling in protest before finally flickering to life. "I got this from my father's safe deposit box," Ellie explained, voice low. "He told me if anything happened to him, I was to get it out, no matter what. I only just found the key." She clicked open a video file. The timestamp read, "Newmarket Gallops Security, May 17th, 2020. The grainy footage showed the inside of a dimly lit stable. Will felt his stomach twist. There was Ray, looking tired but determined, moving between stalls with a flashlight. Suddenly, the camera jerked. Ray must have set it down, aiming it at a narrow aisle. Ashworth himself appeared, flanked by 2 men in suits, their faces obscured. They argued in hushed tones, the sound barely audible. Tom leaned in, listening hard. That's the night before the Derby. The video's audio crackled, and Ashworth's voice came clear. If we lose to the Fletchers again, everything falls apart. This horse will not run unless we win. Do it. One of the men produced a syringe, and Will's heart stopped as he saw them inject something into a rival horse's flank. Ray protested, his voice rising. This is illegal, if anyone finds out. Ashworth cut him off. You work for me, Ray. Do your job. Suddenly, chaos erupted. Ray lunged, trying to grab the syringe. The camera caught the struggle, the shouts, the crash as they tumbled into the hayloft ladder. Ashworth shoved Ray, hard. The image blurred, then refocused on Ray's body sprawled in the straw below, unmoving. The 2 men stood over him. For a moment, no one moved. Ashworth's voice, deadly calm. Clean this up, and get rid of the witness. The last thing the camera caught was the trembling muzzle and wild eyes of Sovereign's Pride, watching everything from his stall. Then the screen went black. The kitchen was silent except for Ellie's ragged breathing. Will covered his mouth with a shaking hand. Tom bowed his head, shoulders shaking with rage. They killed him, Ellie whispered. And they would have killed the horse, too. Only he managed to vanish. That's why Ashworth's so desperate. Sovereign's Pride is the only living witness to what really happened that night. Will's mind reeled. The pieces fell into place. Ashworth's empire, built on fear, threats, and blood. The mysterious accidents, the erased records, the cold efficiency of the cover-ups. Suddenly, Will realized just how deep in over his head he truly was. Tom spoke, voice hoarse with fury. This is murder, and doping, and fraud on a scale no one's seen in British racing in decades. No wonder Ashworth threatened us. If this got out, Ellie's face was tight with grief and determination. It has to get out. My father tried to stop him. He paid the price. But with this video, with Sovereign's Pride alive, maybe we can finally bring Ashworth down. Will thought of his father's words. Truth is its own kind of justice, but it only matters if someone's willing to risk everything to set it free. He felt the enormity of the choice ahead. Hand the evidence over and risk everything. His farm, his friends, his life, or stay silent and let Ashworth's crimes remain buried forever. He stood, crossing to the stable where Sovereign's Pride rested, still and alert in the glow of the oil lamp. Will knelt by the stall, speaking softly, the words meant for the both of them. They tried to silence you, didn't they? But you made it out. Just like me. The horse leaned in, nostrils flaring as if understanding. When Will returned to the kitchen, his decision was made. We can't wait, he said. Ashworth gave us 24 hours. We need to move before he does. We'll make copies of the video, send them to the police, the press. Ellie, Tom, you two know the risks. But I'm done being afraid. Tom nodded, eyes bright with tears and anger. I'll stand with you, Will, no matter what. Ellie managed a small, grateful smile. Me too, for Dad, for all the others. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, the 3 stood together, a fragile alliance bound by grief, hope, and the desperate urge for justice. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but for the first time, Will felt the weight in his chest begin to lift, just a little. Outside, the wind had died. In the barn, Sovereign's Pride stamped softly, as if sensing that, at last, the truth was no longer caged in shadows, but stepping into the light. Bloody, hard, and impossible to deny. Will looked out at the empty fields, his resolve hardening. There would be no turning back now. The reckoning that Ashworth had feared for so long was finally on its way. And whatever came next, Will Thornfield was ready to face it. no matter the cost. Night settled over Thornfield Farm, draping the fields and stone buildings in a heavy, anxious silence. The shadows deepened, broken only by the flicker of an old oil lamp in the farmhouse kitchen. Inside, the air was tense but determined, as if the walls themselves knew something historic was about to unfold. Will Thornfield sat at the head of the battered table, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but shining with a new kind of fire. Ellie Hartwell was across from him, sleeves rolled to the elbow, her fingers flying over her laptop as she checked the video files and drafted a series of urgent messages. Tom Blackwood paced near the door, peering out through the curtains every few minutes, as if expecting headlights to swing up the lane at any moment. They had no illusions about what would happen next. Ashworth would not sit quietly now that the truth was almost free. The feeling of being hunted, of the storm closing in, was everywhere, tightening in Will's chest, coiling in Tom's restless feet, flickering in Ellie's anxious glances at her phone. But for the first time, there was something else, too. Hope. A fragile, stubborn hope. USBs are ready, Ellie announced quietly, holding up a fistful of thumb drives. 5 copies, each with the original footage, and a summary file laying out the evidence. I've set up a secure email chain to BBC's Panorama team, the Guardian's lead crime desk, and the Racing Authority's whistleblower tip line. If anything happens to us, I hit send. The story goes public, and Ashworth burns. Tom exhaled, finally pausing his pacing. You're sure you trust those journalists, Ellie? She nodded. Sarah Mitchell at the Guardian's been after Ashworth for years. She won't ignore something this big. And with enough eyes on this, they can't just make it disappear. Not this time. Will reached out and closed a hand around one of the USBs, feeling the smooth plastic between his fingers, so small, yet suddenly heavier than anything he'd ever held. The evidence on these tiny drives could destroy a dynasty, topple a man whose power had ruled Yorkshire racing for a generation. Tom checked his watch. We need a plan for tonight. Ashworth's deadline is less than 12 hours away, and after what he pulled at the pub, I wouldn't put it past him to try something desperate. Will nodded, mind racing. Tom, you said there was an old cattle trail across the moor. A way out if things go sideways? Tom nodded. Aye, barely more than a sheep path. But it'll get you to the main road? Only problem is, it's rough going, especially at night. But I can take the truck with the decoy trailer. If anyone's watching, they'll follow me. Will, you take Ellie and the horse through the back gate. Stick to the shadows. Ellie looked up, worry clouding her features. I can handle the USBs. But what about Sovereign's pride? If Ashworth's people show up, he's the first target. Will's gaze softened as he looked toward the window, where the stable stood like a small citadel in the moonlight. He's stronger than he looks, and smart. We keep him calm, stick together, and move fast. We don't let them corner us. He looked at Ellie, a rare moment of vulnerability in his eyes. You said you were good with horses? She nodded, a small smile breaking through the tension. Dad taught me everything he knew. Sovereign's pride will listen to me. They shared a long look, the flicker of trust and something deeper passing between them. Will felt her hand brush his, lingering for just a second longer than necessary. Tom coughed into his fist and turned away, pretending to check the locks again. Ellie took a steadying breath. I'll set the emails to send on a time delay. If I don't log in every 2 hours to stop it, everything goes out. Tom nodded. I'll take the back roads and keep the phone with me. If I get stopped, they'll be looking for the wrong trailer. Give you time to get to the moors. Will leaned forward, his voice low but steady. If anything happens to me, either of you, don't look back. Get the story out. Make sure the world knows what Ashworth did. Ellie squeezed his hand. We're not leaving you behind, Will. For a moment, the tension broke, replaced by a quiet resolve. Will met her gaze, and for the first time in days, a real smile threatened the corner of his mouth. The farmhouse clock chimed the hour. Outside, the moon slipped behind a cloud, plunging the yard into shadow. Tom grabbed his coat. I'll move the decoy truck into position. When I give the signal, you move. Ellie, you keep the horse calm. Will, You keep your head down." They split up, every sense on high alert. Ellie slipped out the back, laptop clutched to her chest, while Will hurried to the stable. He found Sovereign's Pride waiting near the door, as if sensing the tension in the air. The horse's ears were pricked, muscles trembling, not in fear, but in anticipation. Will stroked the animal's neck, whispering softly, "You and me, boy. We get through tonight, and you'll never have to run again." Ellie appeared beside him, flashlight tucked under her arm. She set a gentle hand on the horse's nose, whispering to him in the same tone her father had once used. The horse's eyes softened, and he leaned into her touch. A quiet moment passed, the three of them standing together in the golden glow of the lamp. In the yard, Tom flashed the headlights. 3 short bursts, their signal. Time to go. Ellie slipped the USBs into her inside pocket, zipped it tight, and checked the straps on her backpack. Will led Sovereign's Pride through the side gate, keeping low as they wound through the hedgerows. The night was thick with tension, every sound magnified, the distant bark of a dog, the crunch of gravel, the beating of their own hearts. On the far side of the pasture, Sovereign's Pride paused, ears twitching. Will crouched low, listening. Somewhere in the distance, an engine started. A decoy. Tom was doing his part. Ellie squeezed Will's shoulder. "We're almost clear." He nodded, leading the horse onto the old trail. The ground was uneven, but Sovereign's Pride picked his way confidently, Ellie at his flank, Will just ahead. The wind carried the distant sound of sirens, or perhaps it was only the whine of the wind across the moors. For the first time all night, Will felt a glimmer of hope. Dangerous, perhaps, but real. As the three of them slipped away into the darkness, Sovereign's Pride glanced back at the farmhouse, then looked forward, ears pricked as if he knew they were finally running toward the chance at justice. The farm behind them faded into shadow, but ahead, on the high, wild moors, a new dawn waited, one that would bring either freedom or the final reckoning. And none of them would ever be the same again. Fog thickened over the Yorkshire Moors, swirling in ghostly ribbons across the moonlit grass. The only sounds were the distant bleat of sheep and the faint thump of boots and hooves moving swiftly along a hidden path. Will Thornfield glanced over his shoulder every few steps. The tension in his chest wound so tight he thought he might shatter. Beside him, Ellie Hartwell kept close to Sovereign's Pride, her breath quick and white in the icy air, one hand on the USBs zipped into her jacket, the other steadying the horse's trembling flank. They moved in silence, sticking to the shadows where hedges and wild gorse offered cover. Every few minutes, Will paused, listening. Sometimes he imagined he heard engines, shouts, the crackle of a radio, phantom threats that made his heart hammer faster. In truth, the moor was quiet. But they all knew how quickly that could change. Behind them, the faint yellow glow of Thornfield Farm faded. Tom's decoy truck had already left by a different road, headlights bobbing and weaving, taking the risk of being tailed. But the real danger the men Ashworth would send would come quietly, without sirens, and likely without mercy. Sovereign's Pride led the way as much as Will did, the horse moving with surprising purpose despite his battered frame. He navigated rocky ground, picking his way between boulders and sinkholes that only a horse born to the wild would sense. More than once, Will stumbled, boots catching on roots, but Sovereign's Pride steadied him, nudging his shoulder with a warm, almost reassuring breath. They had nearly crossed the first rise when the world exploded behind them. Headlights cut through the fog. 3 black SUVs, engines growling low, bounced across the edge of the field. The beams swung like searchlights, catching the 3 fugitives in their glare. For an instant, Will froze. Then instincts took over. "Move!" he barked, grabbing Ellie's arm. A gunshot cracked, sharp and terrifying, splintering the old fence just feet from where Will had been standing. Splinters showered the grass. Ellie's eyes went wide with fear. "Go! Run!" They bolted, ducking low, with Sovereign's Pride surging ahead, his old strength rising out of nowhere, a force of survival. The horse plunged through the brambles, hooves pounding like thunder, Ellie clinging to his mane, Will racing at their side. The SUVs slammed to a stop, doors flying open, men in dark coats leaping out, flashlights slicing through the fog. Another shot rang out, this one shattering the stillness as a bullet struck the gatepost, splinters flying. Sovereign's Pride whinnied, high and wild, but did not break stride. Will led them toward the narrow gully he and Tom had scouted earlier, a ditch lined with tangled roots and overhanging rocks, almost invisible under the swirling mist. Sovereign's Pride slipped through, just fitting between the stones. Will and Ellie crawled after, mud streaking their clothes, hearts pounding in their throats. The world shrank to a tunnel of sound and motion, the crack of branches, the shouts of men behind, the shrill blast of a whistle, the echo of another shot that ricocheted off the stones. Will grabbed Ellie's hand, dragging her up the far bank. Sovereign's Pride leapt over a fallen log, his breath clouding in the cold. For a moment it seemed they might lose their pursuers. The fog was thick, the ground treacherous, but headlights glimmered through the haze, sweeping back and forth, catching them in glimpses. Men shouted to one another, boots crunching on gravel. Someone had set the old dry grass ablaze. Orange flames licked through the brush, smoke curling between the rocks. Will's lungs burned. He risked a look back. "This way?" he gasped, pulling Ellie toward a narrow sheep path that cut across a stretch of marshy ground. It was barely wide enough for Sovereign's Pride, but the horse followed, trusting their lead, picking his way around sinkholes that would snap a man's ankle if he wasn't careful. Shots rang out again. Closer now. Ellie stumbled but kept running, breath coming in ragged sobs. Sovereign's Pride slowed, moving in beside her, letting her grab hold of his mane. Will felt a surge of gratitude. Without the horse's uncanny sense, they would never have made it this far. The marsh ended in a steep bank and a trickling stream, the only way across a narrow log. Will went first, arms out for balance, boots slipping on the slick wood. Ellie followed, Sovereign's Pride picking his way gingerly, muscles bunched for a leap if the log gave way. The men behind had found the ditch and were scrambling after them, but the burning grass and the thickness of the fog slowed them just enough. Will took one last look, saw dark shapes moving in the haze, flashlights waving desperately. They pushed on, up the rocky slope, until the headlights and shouting faded. The only sounds left were the wild beating of their hearts and the heavy breathing of the horse. They found cover beneath a copse of twisted hawthorn trees, hunched together, barely daring to move. Ellie slid down to sit in the mud, hands shaking, clutching the USBs tight to her chest. "We're not going to make it, Will." He knelt beside her, eyes blazing with defiance. "Yes, we are. They can't track us up here, not in this fog. Tom's drawing them away. We just have to make it to the viaduct. After that, we'll be in the clear." Sovereign's Pride nudged Ellie, his breath warm, eyes bright with a wild intelligence. She managed a weak smile, wrapping her arms around his neck. "He's the bravest soul out here." Will stood, scanning the landscape. The old railway viaduct was just visible through the thinning mist, a jagged line of stone arches crossing the ravine ahead. It was a dangerous crossing, but it was their only chance. "Come on," Will said, offering Ellie his hand. "We have to move. Now." They stood together, battered and dirty, but unbroken. Will led the way, Sovereign's Pride at their side, every muscle taut, as if the horse understood the importance of what was at stake. They climbed the last rise, the cold wind stinging their faces, the taste of smoke and fear sharp in their mouths. Behind them, shouts echoed once more. The men were still coming, relentless. But ahead, across the broken stone span, lay hope. Ellie looked back one last time, tears streaking the mud on her face. "If we make it out, Will, the world is going to know the truth." He squeezed her shoulder, fierce and gentle. "We're going to make it. And no one, not Ashworth, not his men, can stop that now." Together, with Sovereign's Pride leading the charge, they sprinted toward the darkness and the promise of dawn, knowing that this night would decide everything, not just for them, but for every secret that had ever haunted the moors. The first pale light of dawn crept over the wild expanse of the moors, casting the old stone viaduct into sharp, spectral relief. Ribblehead Viaduct, 2 centuries old, battered by storms and neglect, its arches stretching over the deep, black waters of the River Swale. The fog had thinned, but the air still pulsed with tension. Will Thornfield crouched behind a crumbling wall at the edge of the viaduct, every muscle strung tight, scanning the horizon for danger. Ellie knelt beside him, arm protectively wrapped around the trembling USBs in her coat. Sovereign's pride stood with them, nostrils flaring, his sides heaving from the brutal run through the night, but his eyes alive with an almost human intensity. The bridge ahead looked more treacherous than Will remembered, a gaping wound in the middle where 2 arches had collapsed, leaving only 3 spans intact. Rotted wood planks and weed-choked gaps stretched between the stone blocks, with 4 meters of empty space between each standing arch. Any mistake meant a deadly fall. Behind them, the shouts of Ashworth's men grew louder. The men had reached the edge of the moor, their dark silhouettes emerging from the mist like wraiths. Will's heart thudded with fear. There was no going back, only forward, across the broken viaduct. "We have to move," Will said, voice low but urgent. "It's our only chance." Ellie's face was pale but resolute. "He can do it, Will. He has to." Will met Sovereign's pride's gaze, feeling an understanding pass between them. The battered horse, once left for dead, had survived worse than this. Now, he was the only hope they had left. Will led the way, his boots echoing hollowly on the ancient stones. He tested the first span. A few boards creaked but held. He looked back, signaling Ellie and the horse forward. Sovereign's pride moved carefully, nostrils flaring, hooves dancing between the cracks. As they reached the first broken gap, Will's breath caught. The distance looked enormous. He glanced down. Far below, icy water rushed over jagged rocks. There was no time for second thoughts. Sovereign's pride stepped to the edge, pawed at the stone, calculating. Will held his breath. "Go on, boy," he whispered. "You can do it." With a surge of power, Sovereign's pride launched himself over the gap, hooves landing with a jarring thud on the far side. For a moment Will thought the horse might stumble, but Sovereign's pride steadied himself, tossing his mane defiantly. Ellie clambered after him, crawling on hands and knees. Will followed, sweat freezing on his skin. The men behind spotted them and broke into a run, boots pounding, guns drawn. They reached the second arch. This time, the planks groaned ominously beneath Will's weight. Ellie made it across just as the wood splintered and gave way. She gasped, clinging to the edge, dangling over the chasm. "Ellie!" Will lunged, grabbing her wrists. She kicked, scrabbling for purchase. Sovereign's pride snorted, dancing anxiously on the far side. "I've got you," Will growled, hauling her up with every ounce of strength. Behind them, a bullet ricocheted off the stone, sending shards flying. The enemy was almost on them. Ellie collapsed on the stones, sobbing with relief. Will dragged her to her feet. "One more?" he gasped. "We have to go. Now." Sovereign's pride eyed the final span. The bridge was cracked and sloping, the far side crumbling. Will knew they had only seconds before the men caught up. He guided Sovereign's pride to the edge, whispering encouragement. The horse seemed to gather himself, muscles bunching. He sprang, soaring over the gap just as the stones behind him crumbled, the arch collapsing into the river with a roar. Will and Ellie scrambled after him, feet slipping on loose gravel. The edge gave way beneath them, but Sovereign's pride turned, braced his forelegs, and reached out. Will grabbed the horse's mane, Ellie clinging to Will's coat, and together they scrambled to safety as the last of the bridge fell away. They lay on the far side, gasping, hearts pounding. Behind them, Ashworth's men skidded to a halt, cut off by the ruined bridge, their shouts lost in the roar of the river. They raised their guns, but the gap was too wide, nothing but empty air and the rising sun between them and their quarry. Sovereign's pride stood tall on the bank, chest heaving, his body battered but unbowed. He raised his head and let out a wild, triumphant whinny that echoed across the moors, a sound of pure victory. Will staggered to his feet, helping Ellie up. They looked back at the men stranded on the far side, powerless to follow. The nightmare was over. Ellie clutched the USBs to her chest, tears streaming down her face, not just from fear, but from relief and pride. She wrapped her arms around Sovereign's pride's neck, sobbing with joy. "You did it, boy," Will murmured, stroking the horse's neck. "You saved us." They stood for a moment in the pale morning light, hearts thundering, letting the reality settle in. Against every odd, against bullets and fire and fear, they had survived. The rescue wasn't just a flight, it was a declaration. Sovereign's pride had defied death and every limit set on him by men like Ashworth. Will felt the truth burn inside him. This horse wasn't just a witness, he was a symbol, a living testament that some spirits could never be broken. As the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in gold and lavender, the trio moved away from the viaduct, leaving the wreckage and their pursuers behind. Every step Sovereign's pride took was a victory. Over cruelty, over corruption, over despair. For the first time in weeks, Will felt hope blossom, fragile but fierce. The truth would come out. Justice, long denied, was now just a step away. And Sovereign's pride, battered but unbowed, walked at his side, the morning light gleaming in his eyes, a legend reborn and a hero's work not yet finished. 6 months later, Thornfield Farm had transformed from a battlefield to a sanctuary. The windswept hills of Yorkshire rolled green and soft under the June sun, and the battered old stone barns were now painted, mended, alive with the sound of animals and the laughter of visitors. On that summer morning, Will Thornfield walked the pasture fence with a quiet pride, breathing in the scent of wildflowers and rain on earth. The world had changed. He had changed. And the old pain in his heart had faded, replaced by something that felt dangerously close to joy. A glossy plaque now adorned the entrance. Home of Sovereign's pride. Champion and survivor. School children arrived by the busload to meet the legendary horse, whose story had shaken the nation and rewritten the rules of British racing forever. Will watched as a group of kids gathered at the paddock's edge, eyes wide as Sovereign's pride trotted across the grass, no longer the skeletal ghost of that October auction, but restored to his full, muscular glory. His coat shone, mane bright, and eyes sharp with life. The children reached out, giggling as the horse nuzzled their hands, patient and gentle, somehow knowing his fame and the awe he inspired. It hadn't come easily, this peace. The months after the viaduct had been a storm of revelations. With Tom and Ellie at his side, Will had delivered the evidence, USB drives, documents, and their harrowing testimonies directly to the BBC, The Guardian, and the authorities. The impact was immediate, unstoppable. The news broke like a thunderclap across England. Lord Ashworth arrested for murder, fraud, and racing scandal. The video footage of Ray Hartwell's murder and the doping of champion horses played on primetime news. Ashworth's chilling words and the cold brutality of his crimes shocked the nation. Investigations rippled outward, uncovering 12 more cases of race-fixing, doping, and threats spanning decades. Ashworth's trial gripped the country, reporters swarmed the courthouse, racing fans demanded justice, and the racing authorities banned Ashworth from the sport for life. In the end, the judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison, a symbol, at last, that money and power could not buy immunity from truth. Several of his associates were convicted as well, and Ashworth Estate was seized, the stables emptied, the shadow finally lifted. But it was Sovereign's pride who became the true legend. The story of the once forgotten, nearly destroyed racehorse, who had survived violence, neglect, and a daring chase across the moors, captured the hearts of millions. The horse was named an honorary ambassador for racing integrity, and racing fans flocked to Thornfield Farm to see him. A bronze statue was unveiled at Newmarket Racecourse, depicting Sovereign's pride in full gallop, mane flying, hooves barely touching the ground, a symbol of courage and the fight for justice. Underneath, the inscription read, "Some truths will not stay buried. Courage, compassion, and justice will always find a way." On the day of the dedication, Will stood in the crowd, Tom at his side, and Ellie beside him, her hand in his. The world finally knew the truth, and the three of them stood as proof of what could happen when ordinary people refused to be cowed by evil. Thornfield Farm thrived in ways Will had never imagined. After the press storm faded, the farm became a haven, not just for Sovereign's pride, but for injured and neglected animals of all kinds. Tom, once a haunted fugitive, now served as the lead trainer, working with local youth and teaching them respect for animals and the value of integrity. His laughter came easier now, his shoulders straighter, free from the burden of fear. Will and Ellie, united by danger and loss, found love in the new peace. Their wedding was a small, joyful affair, just friends, family, and neighbors, with Sovereign's Pride looking on like a proud elder statesman. Ellie wore wildflowers in her hair, and Tom toasted them with tears in his eyes, speaking of second chances and the families we choose. In the evenings when the work was done, Will often stood at the fence, watching Sovereign's Pride run free with a small herd of rescued horses. The champion had become a leader, gentle with the foals, fierce with any threat. He was never alone now, always a part of something larger, just as Will was. On the day of the annual open house, the entire village gathered to celebrate. Children rode ponies, neighbors shared food, and Ellie organized a fundraiser for animal charities. The local MP, hands clasped behind his back, gave a short speech about the triumph of truth and the legacy of Sovereign's Pride. For once, the words rang true. Later, as the sun began to set, Will, Ellie, and Tom walked the fields together, arm in arm. The laughter of children drifted on the wind. In the distance, Sovereign's Pride raised his head and let out a deep, contented whinny, a sound of freedom and peace. Will looked at his friends, his heart full. "We did it," he said softly. "We gave him back his life. And maybe found our own, too." Ellie squeezed his hand, her eyes bright. "You kept your promise, Will. For Dad, for all of us." Tom grinned, looking every bit the old trainer again. "You two saved more than just a horse. You saved a part of what makes this place worth living in." They stood for a long moment in the fading light, watching as Sovereign's Pride trotted over the hill, the last rays of sun glinting in his proud, unbroken eyes. The world was far from perfect. There would always be darkness, always those who tried to bury the truth. But here, at least, the shadows had lifted. The lesson was simple, Will realized as he watched the horse he had once rescued from death itself. The truth cannot be buried forever. Courage, justice, and love are stronger than any lie. And as dusk fell over Thornfield Farm, the story of Sovereign's Pride, his suffering, his triumph, and the people who risked everything for him would echo across Yorkshire for generations to come. The story was more than a legend now. It was a promise, a reminder that no matter how dark the night, there would always be hope at sunrise.